As we consider how we move back into school, we need to think about neuroscience research about how students learn. Dr. Cooney Horvath talks about stress, learning duration, homework, spaced repetition and sleep, as well as computers and technology. You just can't have a longer school day to improve learning. You also can't always expect every technology to improve learning either. Today in episode 731 of the 10-Minute Teacher, 5 things we need to get right as we move back to in-person learning.
Welcome to the 10-Minute Teacher podcast, hosted by author, educator, speaker, and mom, the Cool Cat teacher, Vicki Davis.
Hey everybody, the Advancement Courses Tournament of Teacher Challenge is underway, featuring everything we miss most and least about pre-pandemic teaching life. Stay tuned at the end of the show to learn how to start voting for your favorites. So excited to welcome back to the show Dr. Cooney Horvath. He has a new book, 10 Things Schools Get Wrong. Today, Jared, we're going to talk about 5 things we need to get right as we move back to in-person learning. Now, I do want to say there's a previous episode, if you have not heard Jared talk about the neuroscience of learning. We were just looking at the stats a minute ago, and over 20,000 people have downloaded that show, Jared. I will link to that in the show notes so that you can take a listen. But right now, lots of schools are going back. What are the things we need to make sure we get right based on the research?
Yeah, and I'm loving this because so I'm down in Australia and we did all last year digital and we just came back a couple weeks ago. So we've been living through this. So 5 principles we can use to help make that transition easier from a brain perspective. So the first one I kind of want to start with is this idea then of stress. So last time we chatted, we saw that short-term moderate stress can actually boost learning. But the problem is long-term chronic stress actually flips that and can harm learning. And the one thing we've seen primarily here is that students coming back from digital come back stressed. We didn't think they would, but we did a poll and about 92% of kids have demonstrated, either said that they're stressed or demonstrated symptoms of chronic stress, which means learning since we've been back has been incredibly slow. So I think the first thing to kind of think about as we come back is this idea of de-stressing. Until you stop that stress response, no learning is going to happen. So how do we start the day or start each class either with a mindfulness meditation or something quiet, something still to settle people down before we move into learning, and then recognize that we're not going to move at that breakneck pace that we thought we would. That idea that we got so much catch up to do, so let's do 2 years in 1 year, just ain't happening. So that it took us about 5 weeks to recognize that here and say, all right, everyone, we got to slow down for this.
Well, and would you also say that, and we're not going to say all the students are in this boat, but there are definitely some students who were not necessarily doing the learning themselves.
The digital stuff wasn't working out as well as we'd hoped. There was way too many ways to game it, not enough systems in place. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. There's going to be a lot of students coming in who not only do we have to catch up, but we have to catch up on all the stuff that some of the other kids may have learned. So if everyone is a year behind because of COVID, some kids might be a year and a half behind simply because they were phoning it in, not really playing with it. So those first couple of weeks, I think we have the best intentions. Let's get going. Let's hit the ground running. You'll find as teachers, you're stressed and exhausted. They're stressed and exhausted. And that running just didn't work. So how can we slow it down, get back into relationships, and give it a couple weeks till we start to ease back into the system?
So important. What's your second?
Second one then has to do with learning duration. Believe it or not, when we learn something new, the brain requires more energy than it normally can get. So it gets its energy from the blood, from glucose. But anytime you enter into a deep learning mode, the brain needs more juice. And it takes that extra energy from cells in between the neurons in there. So we call this extra energy astrocytic glycogen. And interestingly, you have a finite amount of that extra energy, which means there's a finite amount of new learning you can do any one day. There is a limit. And we've known this. If you've ever been to a full day PL session, you know at the end of that day, you're just toast. You're exhausted. There's nothing left in the tank. That's a real thing. So when you take a look at it, it turns out, depending on how much sleep you got the night before, students will have anywhere between 3 to 4 hours of this extra juice, which means the most new learning we could ever do in a day is 3 to 4 hours. So this, beyond simply thinking about starting to rush and get through all the material we may have missed in the last year, now we're starting to see this bigger picture where even if we were able to start running, kids can only do about 3.5 hours till they're going to tap out and all new learning just becomes noise to them. So how are we starting to divvy up the day between new learning and practice of old skills? Yes, you can't learn for 6 hours a day, but you can practice things you already know and make those more automatic. So how are we divvying the day so there's maybe 3 hours of new stuff and then filling the rest with practice to lock down and maintain old skills so as we move forward?
This reality just needs to be there. In the United States, there are some school districts that are having to create learning plans to, quote, catch up or remediate this learning gap that's happened. And I literally saw a plan that one school was planning to just extend the school day and go till 7 o'clock at night.
I love, like, on paper, that sounds fine. But once you start to dig into the biology and the way humans learn, you start to recognize that even if we could schedule that, it just doesn't gel with how we learn, how we remember things, in which case you're wasting your time and your parents' time, who now have to stay up and pick up the kids at 7:30. You can't cram in more learning than the brain can handle in any one day. So we've just got to play in the boundaries we're in.
Yeah, and we're going to take our stressed, depressed students and just add more. I think your approach is very balanced. What's our third?
Third, I'm going to keep extending. We're kind of staying on this same theme of timing, is then homework. So a lot of schools here kind of, rather than extending the day, they've said, well, we're just going to extend homework. And now kids are getting 3, 4, 5 hours of homework a night. If you look at the research on homework, we've got the same learning issues. So most homework, luckily, isn't about learning new stuff. It tends to be about practicing stuff we already have. So we don't always have that issue of learning energy during homework, but we do have this issue of diminishing returns. So when you look at the impact of homework on learning and performance, you see this really steep curve right at the beginning. So the first 60 minutes of homework a kid does, and I'm talking about secondary schools. If you're in primary schools, homework has almost no impact. Unless kids are reading with their parents or working with their parents, there's no reason to assume primary kids need homework. So only talking about middle secondary kids. Those first hours, so 0 to 60 minutes, that's where you get 89% of their growth from homework. In the next chunk of time, between 60 and 90 minutes, you get an additional 11%, so diminishing returns, an extra half hour for only 11% more. I don't know that that's great. And once you get over 90 minutes, then the graph of impact actually flips and it starts to harm learning, where when kids do 3 hours of homework a night, those kids learn about as much as the same kids who do 10 minutes of homework a night. You actually start to lose learning. So when we're considering homework, a big idea would be, sweet, just more homework. That way we can get through the learning. Nope. You've got a sweet spot of about 60 minutes a night. And I don't mean per class, I mean total, where homework is effective. And past that point, you might actually start harming learning. And now you need to make up for that back in class. So if we're thinking about using homework as a catch-up tool, 60 minutes is our cutoff. And beyond that, we're just playing with fire.
Wow. And this is not just pandemic pedagogy. This is like forever. Like, this is the research
stuff. This is when you start to think about it, go back to our last episode when we talk about recall is the basis for deep memory. Bringing information online is how you get deep memories learning for something. So let's say you have 6 classes, each class gives 10 minutes of homework. That 10 minutes is pretty much all you need to recall the ideas, relevant ideas up, and then you're done with them. Playing for them for another 2 hours isn't going to do much more. It's the idea of homework is bring them online so you can reconsolidate them, boom, bigger memory, move on to the next thing. So long as we keep thinking of homework not as new learning, but as just locking down, drilling old stuff we already know, that's when it becomes super powerful.
Love that. Okay, what's next?
You can see I'm kind of on a little trajectory with this concept of spaced repetition and sleep. So we're just talking about recall is the basis for deep memories. Now people start to see, here's how you get away with doing an hour of homework a night. Most people say, well, we got a lot of stuff to do. No, one of the biggest principles of human and animal and plant learning is this idea of spaced repetition. If you can do the same thing over subsequent days, that's where you get deep impact. So instead of studying 1 hour tonight, you do 20 minutes tonight, 20 minutes tomorrow, 20 minutes 3 days after that. You will get better learning, better retention, better understanding than doing it all at once. So this idea of spaced repetition, so long as you're sleeping in between each time you try and repeat or bring back up a memory, recall it, that's how we get this boost. So going back to homework and this learning, we can do less and get a bigger impact so long as we're recognizing that, yep, we're going to hit an idea in homework tonight. That's all we got to do. Tomorrow, we're going to re-hit that idea and bring in a new one. The next day, we're going to re-hit the new idea, bring in a new one. Then we're going to cycle back. It's just these really quick, short, sharp hits, which brings us to the phrase frequency over quantity. When it comes time to the impact of homework and learning and forming deep memories, frequency is more important than quantity. Doing something a little bit over subsequent days is always stronger than doing one thing today and then never seeing that thing again for the next year till you have a test on it at the end of the year.
Fantastic. Okay, what's our last one?
Last but not least, I'm bringing it back now to the bane of our existence, computers. So we finally started to get our data back on computers, and it turns out over this whole COVID period, when kids sat down at a computer to do homework, they were making it about 6 minutes before they started multitasking. And when they sat down for a Zoom session, so for class, it was anywhere between 2 and 15 minutes before they started multitasking. We've known for over 3 decades that computers are not great for learning. And it has nothing to do with the computer. I'm not bagging the tool. Any tool can be used for learning. The problem is students spend 10 times more, 10 times, on computers, using them to play games, surf the internet, have fun with their friends, than they do using that computer for learning. So you can assume each kid in between 8 and 18 spends about 200 hours a year using a computer for learning, about 2,000 hours using it to flip between media content. So when they sit down to learn from a computer, they naturally just start multitasking. Going back to the story, let me check my Twitter, let me check my feed. And we know multitasking is the single worst thing you can do for learning and memory. If you remember one thing from this podcast, please let it be that. Multitasking is the single worst thing for learning, and computers beg kids to multitask. So when we're thinking about our live and when we're thinking about our homework sessions, yes, we've been using computers and Zoom because we had to. Now we have to recognize we don't have to anymore. And the more we can get off of the computer, the better that's going to be for learning. It's just so much harder and more of a slog to try and get kids to learn from a screen than it is to get them to learn from a book or a pen and paper or anything else. So how can we get them off this computer now that we have them live and keep them off the computer while they're at home too? Just something to think about.
Wow. Well, for me, I'm a technology teacher, so I have to push back a little bit. But to me, Absolutely. It depends on the tool. For example, if I used an interactive tool like, say, a Nearpod or a Pear Deck, I found that the kids stayed engaged and they were with me because they were interacting with me and they were interacting with the content. It wasn't just, I'm talking to you.
Yes.
So to me, it's how do you use the tool? Teachers in a teacher's meeting in Zoom will be multitasking in 2 to 5 minutes as well.
Yep, absolutely.
I mean, they're absolutely going to do it. They're going to turn their camera off or they're going to check email. They're going to do it too. So unless it is conversation, interaction, engagement, do you throw the baby out with the bathwater and say all technology is awful? Or do you say that, okay, we don't need to be overly dependent and we need to use it strategically?
I think the tempered argument is exactly what you made, is so long as you use a tool strategically, any tool can be good for learning. But now you have to contextualize that and say, where are we coming from? Coming off of the back of this big tech movement we just went through, I'm wondering if trying to continue to use tech in an effective way is going to be the best way to get kids back grounded and thinking the way they need to. Homework, I can't control what you do online there, so you're going to be doing what you want to. But live and in person, if the idea of coming back to the classroom is to de-stress, and the number one way to de-stress is to reform relationships with human beings, then you're left questioning, for the next month or so, does it make sense to continue to try and use computers, or does it make sense to embrace the new live attitude till we get everyone back normalized, learning starts to feel normal again, and then we start trickling it back and say, okay, now we can start playing a little broader. Once we got everyone off of this bandwagon of fear and stress and uncertainty, and I'm talking again, you're absolutely right, teachers too. One of the big shockers here was we all came back stressed. I have never been this exhausted in my life running around teaching than I have the last 5 weeks. Once we get teachers and students back into relationship mode, back into calm, hey, this is predictable, the days make sense again, that's when we can start playing with things on the edges to say, okay, now how can I improve my impact? And that's where tech might come back in and say, now that we've stepped away from it for a bit, let's go back and start using it effectively again.
Yeah, I think the other challenge is, where I am, we've, after Christmas was just hard. I don't have any other, lots of quarantines and this and that and the other. And right now, the attendance rate is just through the roof, incredibly amazing. Everybody wants to be at school, which what a blessing that is. But every so often you end up with somebody in quarantine, and then I'm just so thankful. Of course, my class is a little different because I teach technology and I've been paperless now for 10 years. So it's not like this is anything new for me. But it does make it easier if it's there and accessible. Just if, okay, today you have to go home, there's not so much friction, Yeah. But you're right. It does require a lot of discipline. And I've been looking at the statistics on ghosting, and in the United States, and I saw a number today that was from 1 to 3 million students who are completely disengaged since last March.
Oh, wow.
That is a lot of kids. And, what do you do if you're not even on page 1 of the book? If you're on halfway through last year's textbook for a variety of reasons. So the name of the book is 10 Things Schools Get Wrong and How We Can Get Them Right by Dr. Jared Cooney Horvath and David Bott. We look forward to having David on a future episode. And you've given us a lot of great things to think about and to conversate about as we move back into the face-to-face classroom. And this is not an easy time, but it's an important time to look at the research and not just say, hey, more school is going to get us more results, because it truly does have diminishing returns, doesn't it?
It does. And thank you for chatting about this and for having me on. This was really fun.
Thank you, Jared. The Advancement Courses Tournament of Teachers Bracket Challenge is back again for the 4th year in a row, and voting is now open from March 22nd to March 31st. This year's Remember When edition features 32 scenarios that educators both miss and don't miss about classroom life before 2020. Things like taking students on field trips versus hosting classroom parties, or fire drills derailing your lesson versus a broken air conditioner. Now, I've had that last one, and that's no fun. Vote for which scenarios you want to see advance in each round and see the winners announced on April 1st. This is going to be fun, so join in at coolcatteacher.com/tournament to learn more and start voting.
If you enjoyed today's 10-Minute Teacher podcast, why not subscribe on iTunes? You can also catch up with Vicki on Twitter at CoolCatTeacher, or level up and learn with her blogs and free resources at coolcatteacher.com. Thanks for listening.